Create, Build, and Manage Daily is brought to you by Centerpost Media. Let us help tell your story. Go to centerpostmedia.com for details.
My first guest believes perception is a critical component of leadership. Kimberly Wright is the founder of Perception Leadership, and she joins me via Zoom tonight. Kimberly, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We appreciate your time. How does our own perceptions affect our leadership?
You know, a lot of times we're not even aware of our own perceptions and the biases that we have. I don't know if you remember in 2015, there was the dress that broke the internet. And it was a black and blue dress versus a white and gold dress. And people were dying on the hill of, it's this color, it's this color. And it was actually a black and blue dress, but no matter how much people believed it was a different color, you know, it affected their perception, and that became a belief in their mind. And those beliefs are what dictate how we lead and how we interact in the workplace.
Tell you what, Kimberly, my perception was it was just last year, so you just made me feel a little bit older when you said that was back in 2015. But I do remember that debate that happened on the internet.
Yeah.
Now, you also talk about how female leaders face unique challenges in this regard. Explain that.
You know, they do. I think it's safe to say that we all can agree that women do have a different set of challenges than men a lot of times, especially if they're working mothers or married or so forth. But the thing that I really like to hone in on is what I call the accidental leaders. A lot of times a woman will move into leadership unintentionally. She started with an organization or a company and she's served for years, maybe as an admin or a receptionist, and continued to just be promoted because of her faithfulness and her gaining knowledge. But then she's moved into a leadership role. And the small business owners, I applaud them for promoting within, but then they don't know to equip the leaders, the female leaders. And so women are now in a leadership role with a lot of insecurity and uncertainty and just not the same tools maybe that men have access to in the workplace.
No, I agree with you on that, Kimberly. And so I'm curious, with your organization, how do you equip female leaders to make that connection between self-perception and leadership?
You know, one of the first things that we do, and diving just a little bit into the psychology, but we just take a moment to explore. And that means looking at some of the labels and our own biases. And we all have, you know, men and women both have gender biases. For example, if I told you, picture a firefighter in your head, if you're like me, you're going to picture a man, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all men are firefighters. So even women carry their own biases, but they also carry labels on themselves of how they've identified themselves through the years. And when they bring that into a leadership role, it can affect and dictate their behavior. We always operate out of our own self-portrait, and that is a very influential and impactful on a team culture and how others perceive us as a leader.
I want to put your website up on the screen for those who are watching BizTV tonight. It is perceptionleadership.com. If you're listening to the podcast, easy to remember, perceptionleadership.com. You mentioned about the biases, and certainly I could see how that affects us as far as how we perceive, but it also can affect your decision process, right, when you're making decisions?
Very much so, because sometimes it can make you slow to make a decision because you're afraid of making a mistake or a little hasty. Oftentimes, another thing that women have a challenge with is asking for help or maybe even delegating, because they see it as a sign of weakness that, oh, if I delegate or if I tell them I'm not sure how to do this, then they're going to think I can't do the job. And that's a higher fear in women than it is in men typically.
Well, that's incredible insight, Kimberly, because I've never thought about it from that perspective. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. How can companies, because we have a lot of business leaders that watch the show, so how can companies use your tools to retrain their talent, their current talent they have?
The first thing that I think that business owners really need to do is just kind of be aware of how perceptions are affecting the leaders and maybe how they're interacting with their female leaders versus their male leaders. Because we have to lead by design and not just by default. And that's what happens sometimes when we're not aware of our perceptions. But then I also do offer coaching times with women. I come into the workplaces and spend a couple of days going through, a 3-measure process of exploring and then equipping them in competency and confidence and delegating and so forth, and then empowering them to do what they're called to do there in the workplace.
Yeah, I want to give you an opportunity because some viewers might be watching tonight and they hear you talk about, how you would coach or how you would lead your employees different, male versus female. Just to clear the air, we should treat all our employees equally, but they're unique in how you approach them. Is that what you're saying, Kimberly?
Oh, absolutely. And, men aren't male leaders. They're not intentionally trying to treat women differently. Oftentimes we are programmed, men are programmed to be kinder to women or to not be as direct in speaking and so forth. And so even in a job review, women will get a little different feedback. Maybe it's a little sugar-coated compared to what a man may say to another man, just because they're trying to be sensitive to a woman's feelings. So it's all coming from a good place. It's just the unawareness that we have of how we communicate differently, how we receive things differently, and so forth. It goes back to that perception of how we should interact with women versus men and so forth.
This is a great topic, and I got 60 seconds. So is there anything we can do tonight, an exercise to make us more self-aware of our biases?
I think just that awareness. For example, when I lived in Las Vegas for several years, when I would say I lived in Vegas, people's eyes were, oh my. So, we have biases about everything. So I think that's a starting point of just being aware of, as we're thinking, be intentionally aware and cognitive of our thinking. It's
good thoughts. Kimberly Wright, appreciate it. Again, she's a founder of Perception Leadership. And you can find Kimberly online if you want to know more about this topic and maybe explore it with your own staff, your own team, or just yourself as you look to grow in the new year. That website again is perceptionleadership.com, perceptionleadership.com. Stick around. This is Create, Build, and Manage Daily.